Let's cover the 4 key activities of dealing with data. Before we even dive into the activities, the processes, the roles, and everything else dealing with data, there are some fundamentals that we have to cover. An example is seeing data as assets, that is, tangible assets in the organization that must be measured with strict rules. But there are other relevant principles that we really have to master here. Let's take a look at these. Let's talk about the main principles of data literacy, which can usually be distilled into 4 in specific. What I mean is that throughout this course, we are going to cover many activities, practices, disciplines, concepts, but there are certain underlying principles which are common to all of these and which are important to understand. We can identify in specific 4 key principles which will be relevant to everything related to data. The first is seeing data as assets. That is, considering them tangible, measuring data in the same way as you would measure other hard assets, if you will, such as people, resources, inventory, etc. This is the only way that you will be able to both track and monetize data. Then, the second principle, and a good segue, is precisely monetizing data. That is, understanding that data can have financial benefits if handled correctly. They are not just something intangible. If properly managed and properly governed, they can reduce compliance costs, increase operational efficiency, and have other tangible financial benefits. The third principle is information maturity. That is, each organization has a level of sophistication in terms of how they handle data, and this level can be measured, which indicates how sophisticated your organization is and how far along the journey you are. And finally, for data governance in specific, or DG, it must be considered a business function and not an IT one. That is, many people mistakenly think that governing data is a responsibility of IT because it's connected to the IT systems and information. But this would be wrong. Data are the responsibility of everybody in their respective department or team and not an IT job. They're a business function just like hiring, budgeting, and so on. Let's start with our first principle, data as assets. This is crucial for any data governance or any data management initiative to succeed. That is, in order to benefit and profit from data, data must be seen as assets, just like inventory, material, products, and others. And this principle consists of applying the same rigor, the same processes, and the same standards to measure data as you would for any other assets in the company, IT systems, employees, or others. With these, you probably already measure their performance, you measure how much they cost, you measure how much money they make you at the end of the day, and data should be no different. Specifically, this will manifest itself in the information lifecycle. As we'll see soon, it's about how data are created, how they're stored, how they're used, how they're transmitted, how they're updated, how they're destroyed, and possibly other stages. Our goal here is to turn data from something intangible into something tangible, which can only then be measured, monitored, and tracked. This principle must be kept in mind because it's one of the key success factors when implementing a DG or DM initiative. That is, you need to get stakeholders thinking in this way. They must see data as assets in order to even think that they can generate financial value. And that's exactly what's needed. Using the employee analogy, you can't convince someone to hire a person if you can't show what they cost and what they make you at the end of the day, or if you can't even track them. It's the same exact situation for data. The second principle stems directly from the first one, and it is, if data can be measured as hard assets, then we can extract monetary value from these data, period. Usually, the benefits that stem from managing data well are the opposite of the costs of not managing data well. That is, even if there are costs of having people to govern and to manage data properly, will be a fraction of what you're going to pay if you don't handle data well. We'll dive into this deeply later, but there are usually three main types of monetization when data are handled properly. The first is increased revenue. That is, by having more accurate product information, you can create better products, or you can even actually sell the data, or you can have better marketing campaigns. Increased revenue. The second type is decreased operational costs. More accurate information helps you to save on unnecessary tasks or activities, or reducing waste in terms of unnecessary people, unnecessary cost centers, unnecessary products, unnecessary shipments, and so on. And finally, the third type is decreased fines and regulatory risk. In sectors such as finance and healthcare, this is crucial. Managing data well results in a lot less compliance breaches, which means a lot less heavy fines. And anything that can be done to reduce the number or the value of these fines is money that the company saves. But naturally, as we mentioned, data only generate money if they are well handled. If not, they generate costs and not revenue, period. Our third principle is information maturity. And this is a type of maturity in the organization, just like any other type. You can have technological maturity, you can have human resource maturity, and so on. And data are no exception. So before starting any data governance or data management activity, the organization should measure itself in terms of where they are in terms of data. That is, how well they prevent data issues, how will they remediate data issues, what is the quality of their controls, among other aspects, which we'll cover in detail later. Information maturity is a more general term, and it can encompass many different activities. For example, how data literate are the stakeholders and the executives? Do they see data as assets? Are they aware of the costs of data problems, the benefits of managing data well? Do they even know what data they have? Another example is how sophisticated are the policies for retaining data. For example, sensitive data, including personally identifiable information data. Is this information tracked in terms of retention periods? Is it disposed of securely? And how do different departments deal with this? Because it may not be standardized. Another example is how much information there is about data, that is, metadata, for different applications, for different data stores, departments, and others. As we'll see in later lessons, metadata are crucial. They store business rules, data validity requirements, data owner information, the lineage of data throughout different stages, information on the data structures and formats, and more. How much metadata you have and how good they are tells you a lot about your information sophistication. Please keep in mind that information maturity is not a direct representation of how effectively data are managed. It's just an indicator, but it is a powerful indicator. So for example, if you're trying to get a data governance project off the ground, but your company has a low level of information maturity, and most executives don't see data as assets, that doesn't necessarily mean the project will fail. It's just an indicator, but you can assume that you are going to have a tough road ahead of you. And finally, regarding data governance in specific, it's very important to clarify that this is a business function and not an IT one. What happens is that many companies believe, erroneously, that data equal IT, and that they are the sole responsibility of the IT department, which is an error. Data governance should be considered a business function. It must be performed by different departments in terms of their own data with their own owners. It's just like hiring. Every department does it, some do it better than others, and all departments do it better if there are central policies and central processes. So look, when starting a data governance program, in specific, DG may have its own dedicated team, probably with different people plucked from different departments, But the goal of data governance is for it to eventually disappear into the organization. It becomes just one more operation that every department performs, or set of operations. In fact, with a high level of sophistication in a company, data governance exists just as any other function within each department that they're responsible for, just like hiring, budgeting, performance management, and so on. Each department usually will have their own data owner, their own data stewards, their own data sources that they're responsible for, and so on. What are some examples? The first is that the industry is an indicator in many cases. The industry that a company is in can inform a lot about the regulation for that industry, which in turn affects the maturity level. For example, companies in finance or in healthcare where regulation is so tight, and especially regulation around data, will probably be companies that are data aware from day one. Then, IT has a love-hate relationship with data. You would think that, despite the fact that data governance is not an IT function, but a business one, IT would probably support it because they have some things in common: information systems, databases, and so on. But in fact, IT can become one of the toughest departments to convince in terms of data projects. And this is because every other department usually accepts it with some resistance. But the IT department can talk about deadlines, the impact on technology, the impact on app development and projects, and give you 300 excuses to not manage data properly. It's almost like that saying that the more that you are a specialist in something, the more that you can use that knowledge to prevent that. So in many cases, the closeness that IT has with data makes them one of the biggest opponents. And finally, actual data monetization can occur. In specific sectors, such as marketing, besides saving in operations and improving revenue, the data cannot just generate insights, but possibly be actually sold, which generates revenue directly. What are our key takeaways in this lesson? The first is seeing data as assets. In order for an organization to take data seriously, to manage them well, to govern them well, to track performance, and to track data quality, the data must be considered assets, period. There must be the same rigor that is used for other assets in the organization, like systems, inventory, people, and so on. Then, when data are properly managed as assets, they can provide financial benefit, usually either as increased revenue from customer insights, as reduced operational costs from operational insights, or as reduced compliance risk due to better compliance. Then, information maturity is an indicator. It's an important benchmark for an organization to measure how it already handles data in the present. Naturally, the higher the sophistication, the higher the probability that a data governance or data management initiative will succeed. And finally, within the different data disciplines, data governance in specific is business and not IT. An organization cannot consider it just an IT job. It must be considered a business function that every department or every line of business must perform, just like any other operation in that department. So as we see, these are the 4 key principles that we really need to master when dealing with data. We have to see data as assets, tangible assets that can be managed. We have to realize that data can be monetized, but only if handled well. We have to realize that every organization has a data maturity level, and ours is no exception, and we have to see data governance in specific as a business function of every department and not an IT one.